him back to life.
You know, people sit out on the front porch hoping people will come by.
Go forth and do good. It's insane. I have the most understanding wife in the world.
I treat everybody the same thing.
Oh, that's the other thing I love about Marietta. It's like a melting pot.
You are listening to Marietta Stories. Each week, veteran podcaster Bill Nowicki brings you the heartwarming, interesting, and fun stories from the people that make the community of Marietta, Georgia, a place to call home. Here's your host, Bill Nowicki.
Hey everybody, welcome to Marietta Stories Podcast. I have Tom Dugan with me. He's an actor, and he has a one-man show that's coming to the Marietta's Strand Theater at the end of May, and I think he has a fascinating story. And he's been an actor. He's out in L.A., so he got up a little early, I guess. But welcome to Marietta Stories, Tom.
Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Great. Tell me, you grew up in New Jersey, which is like me. You're
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I was class of 79. What were you?
So was I, class of 79. I was 4 when I started school, but so I'm a little bit younger.
Oh, one of those geniuses.
Well, no, it's just my mom wanted me out of the house, I think. But anyway, forget about me. So you grew up in New Jersey, and tell me about your upbringing.
Coming to do Wiesenthal in Marietta, who is one of the great Jewish heroes of the 20th century, and I'm not even Jewish.
Yeah, Irish Catholic.
Irish Catholic.
And your dad, but your dad has a tie to this whole thing. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, my interest started in World War II with my dad. We were watching a movie called Battleground, which starred Van Johnson and I think James Whitmore. It was on the Late Late Show or whatever. I was just a little kid. It was about the Battle of the Bulge. Mm-hmm. And my mom said to me, your dad did this. And I said, geez, Dad, you were in the movies? And he said, no, but I was in the Battle of the Bulge. And that's when I learned that, my dad's participation in World War II. He received the Bronze Battle Star, the Purple Heart. He liberated a camp called Langenstein in Germany. And I learned what it was like, what lessons that he took away from the war. And the one that always stuck out with me was he had shrapnel in his hip. So I remember feeling a shrapnel in his hip and saying, boy, Dad, you must hate Germans. He said, no, I don't. I don't judge people by what group they belong to. I judge them by how they behave. And I didn't understand that as an 8-year-old, but I figured it was probably one of those important things I should remember. Well, years later, I was reading Simon Wiesenthal's obituary, and in it they talked about his rejection of collective guilt. And a light went on in my head, and I realized that's what my father was trying to teach me way back when I was 8 years old. And I thought, oh, this might be a good subject for a play, because I am a playwright. I'm an actor and a playwright. I've been writing one-person shows now for 20 years. So I started looking into Wiesenthal and got intrigued. There's another reason that I'm interested in Simon's story is that, and of course, Simon Wiesenthal was a Holocaust survivor who, after the war, spent the rest of his life hunting down through the legal process Nazi war criminals who had, quote-unquote, escaped to South America and Central America, some even in Europe and some even in the United States. He dedicated his life to that. One of the other reasons that really drew me to the story was that now it's almost 30 years ago, I married my wife, Amy, who is Jewish. And now we have 2 teenage Jewish boys. And so I'm the welcomed outsider in a Jewish home. Tolerance plays a large part of our family dynamic. And tolerance is what Simon Wiesenthal had preached for 60 years. So that's where this story comes to be a familiar or a comfortable place for me.
Wow. Yeah, and it's interesting. I didn't think about you marrying someone of the Jewish faith, and I suspect that gave you a whole different perspective on this World War II and what your dad went through.
I always had an enormous amount of empathy, and coiled in horror about the stories of World War II, specifically the Holocaust. But it wasn't until I did the research of the specifics, because when you write something, you really have to know what you're talking about clearly. So when I was reading about the specifics of the Holocaust and what was done to these people, it was difficult for me to read. I had to put it down the books, and at the time, my kids were like 5 and 6 years old. And I remember crawling onto the floor and just laying there with my boys, my Jewish boys, and being grateful that they were born where they were born and when they were born.
Wow. How do you even extract what you wanted to get across as a playwright in that story? What did you pull out of that, and what was your thought about the character that you created this one-man play about?
It's inevitable that you start out with preconceived notions, and they're almost always useless. Once you start reading, you get a list of the books that are, the Pulitzer Prize books and the New York Times bestseller books, so you know that you're starting off in a legitimate place. And the stories, the ones that speak to me the most, start to rise to the top. After you get it's like if you can picture a laundry line, you hang the stories up on the laundry line and you're looking at all these things, and then your imagination starts to figure out a reason why you'd be telling these stories, and you got to come up with a scenario. Why would Wiesenthal be telling these stories? And then that's the creative process. So a lot of his stories have similar lessons to be learned. You've got to choose the most interesting ones and maybe pick a little bit from this one and that one and create the strongest version of that lesson. After all of that work, who the heck wants to see a play about the saddest subject in human history? So I had those doubts going into this, but when I cracked open my very first book about Wiesenthal, I learned that he was a amateur stand-up comedian.
Really?
And that was the key to his success, because when he was doing his work and trying to get the individual governments to chase down these people, in Germany, in Austria, Poland, nobody wanted to hear anything about it. Even Israel just didn't want to hear about it. They were too busy with with the future. But Wiesenthal was smart enough to know that unless you address the past, it'll come back and bite you. So he knew he had to be able to keep someone's attention who didn't want to hear it. And so the way that he would do it was through his charm and his stage presence. He was able to engage people enough so that they did start the process of searching for these Nazis. His talent as a raconteur served him throughout his entire life. He would have students come to his Jewish Documentation Center, which is where the play is set, in Vienna. He would speak to these college students, these high school students, about his work, answer questions. It was that charm that and the sense of humor that I was able to key into to write the piece. And I've been doing that for 10 years, and I'm happy to say that the audiences have been laughing as much as they've been crying when they come and see the show. And I've done, 450 performances. So far, so good.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me, because that's what I thought when I read the press kit and stuff like that, which is, oh gosh, this is so tough. This will be so tough to hear, but it sounds like it's not like that.
It's not. It's not like that. And how could it be and be so successful? It's just not. There's such a preconceived notion about how sad it's going to be that I did something that no writer ever does. I start the play with a joke. The first line is a joke, which you can never do that because there's no setup. How could you do that?
Right.
How could you tell a joke if you don't even have a setup?
Right.
I assumed that there was already enough of a setup, preconceived notion of what this play was going to be was the setup. And so I started it, and I remember the very first performance I gave, and I thought, oh boy, am I going to go down in flames? But when I told this joke, the place broke up because were so surprised that it started that way.
Yep.
And I knew that I was keying into some of Wiesenthal's magic.
All right, I got Elizabeth Denny with me. Since we started Marietta Stories 3 years ago, Johnny Walker Realty has grown tremendously.
When I joined, I was the fourth agent besides Johnny and Carrie, so there were 6 of us. And now I believe there are 25 of us. So, yeah.
Man, somebody's got to cook for all those people when you have a company thing, don't you?
Thankfully, we have more cooks now, so it works out.
We got the Marietta Market at the square. We have one of the best farmers markets. Restaurants are great. There's lots to do around the square. Folks moved away from the square in the 80s. Now they're all coming back, and now's the time to work with Johnny Walker Realty. They're at 262 Church Street. You go to johnnywalkerrealty.com or call them up at
678-626-0403.
Like the first thing I thought of, because I have gone through the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. I'm like, oh my, I came out of there. I was drained. My brother and I, we couldn't even talk. We just kind of, I can't remember what happened the next 2 hours. And then we started to recover.
Yeah, and you just said something that was very profound in that you couldn't remember what happened 2 hours after.
Right.
I saw, I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's a movie about Wiesenthal called I Have Never Forgotten You. It's a Mariah Films documentary. And in it, they talk about his life and his work, and they have interviews of Holocaust survivors and their horrible stories. And in it, some woman tells a story, I won't repeat it here, tells a story that was so horrible that I couldn't remember 10 minutes into the film. I mean, I watched it in movie theater because it just came out. So, when you're in the movie theater, if you missed it, you missed it. So I missed it. And then I just said, what the heck was that? So I had to go back and bought another ticket. I went, and it happened again. And then I realized that the story was so horrible that I was in shock.
Right.
And I thought, I can't do that on the stage. You can't afford to put people in shock and have them just be so delirious as to how horrible it is. So what I wound up doing was, without giving, shortchanging the subject matter, I had to dance that fine line of not going too far to put the audience in shock.
Wow. Man, that must have been some journey for you too, going through those. I mean, I'm sure you had many, many rewrites or whatever editing sessions.
Sure.
To try to get that fine balance.
Well, what I did was I did test audiences. I rented a theater. I invited people, and then afterwards, I would say, okay, what worked and what didn't. And I asked very pointed questions. And I said, what was confusing? Was this part confusing? Oh yeah, that part was confusing.
Right.
I wasn't sure if it was his mother or his sister or whatever. And then I went back and I rewrote it. The next night, I would come out with it in a different way, and eventually I got it to be clear.
Wow. Yeah, and it also sounds like you probably asked them about how they felt.
Well, I asked them all kinds of questions that pertain to the structure of the play, and people were just throwing things out, But the one real telling thing was one guy out of a big group. He said, well, I think you need to get into more detail about the horrors of the Holocaust. And the rest of the room just said in unison, no, you don't.
That's great.
So you got a majority rules kind of situation, So it's my secret weapon. Doing those readings and those talkbacks are my secret.
I'm actually really excited to see this show now. Thanks. I appreciate that because I was like, after that Holocaust museum experience, it's like, I don't know if I can take it.
I don't know if I can take it.
Yeah. But talk about the overall lessons and maybe how they apply because, history, everybody always says if you don't understand history, you're doomed to repeat it. What do you think lessons from your research, the play, that we can apply to today's world?
Well, it's boiled down to something very simple, I think. Unless you can recognize the human savage inside of yourself, you're in big trouble trying to recognize it somewhere else.
Wow, that's deep.
And some audience members, because I always have, I mean, you know, when I did those discussions and developing the play, that was one thing. But after all the performances, I give a talk back where people ask questions about the development of the show, and we just talk. You know, I'm not rewriting the play. I'm just, you know, because they do have questions, and they like the fact that I'm 95 years old on stage, and I come out, you know, I'm about half that age. So, you know, about half that way. Well, I'm a little bit more than half that age. Anyway,
you're catching up. Yeah.
Catching up. I use less makeup now than I did 20 years ago.
Yeah.
The difficult thing for some audience members is to accept the fact that, well, there's this story about Eichmann and Wiesenthal's fascination with the fact that Eichmann was not a sociopath or, you know, he wasn't clinically, he didn't have a criminal mind. He wasn't a sicko. He wasn't a crazy man. And there's no such thing as pure evil. So some audience members have a hard time with the description of Eichmann being an average guy. They really, really do. They want him to be a monster. They want him to be an apparition, because it's very frightening if he's not.
Right. That's,
you know.
But if that matches the real world, then like you're describing, you can then see people can have those sides to them, so it makes you more open and questioning whether that person is what they show themselves to be to you. They might have that side of them that's not too cool. You know, you just made me think of something. I was on submarines in the 80s, and you know, and I would call it an artificial environment. So you're, you know, in this tube for like we were out for 2.5 months. One of the most interesting discussions I had with one of the submariners that I hadn't lived through this, but they went to the Philippines for a port of call. The only guys on the sub that didn't have an affair and that were married that went to this port of call are the ones that didn't leave the submarine. And the reason is, you think about it, you're deprived of fresh food, you're deprived of, you know, women and contact with people out all that time. Well, when you're finally released, like you described, there's a part of us that react in a reptilian way when they're deprived of things. Or
we have no idea who we are. We're animals. We're animals. My father said, you know, I was in the discussions that I had with him. He passed away a few years ago, but I said, you know, how can you say that all these people are not bad? How did this happen? And he said, you don't know what you're capable of until you're hungry.
Yep.
And he grew up in the worst part of the Depression. You know, no net for him at all. Mm-hmm. And so he understood what it was like to be hungry. So he had a unique perspective on what the people of Germany were going through. You know, so it's to your point exactly. We don't know what we're capable of, you know, and you just try being hungry.
But it sounds like you were really paying attention to what he had to say about the war, because, you know, I've watched those war movies too. And my dad used to laugh. He was at Iwo Jima. And he watched Sands of Iwo Jima, and he laughed. He goes, you know, that is not the way it was, you know, kind of thing. Yeah,
my father would do the same thing. And so I would always say, how's this one, Dad? And he would say, oh, it's garbage.
Yeah.
He still enjoyed watching them.
Right.
But then he would point out, I remember he pointed out to me this one movie, and that's why I discussed this one, because he says, this is a good one. This is close to reality, the Battle of the Bulge film. We did get to see Saving Private Ryan together.
Oh, yeah.
And I asked him, I said, Dad, is that the way it was? He said, the only thing that was missing was the smell of dead fish. So his memory was really pretty perfect when it came to that stuff. And I was thrilled. I'm the youngest of four, so that the fact that I got my dad's attention at all was an amazing thing. So that's why I remembered it.
It was almost like a hierarchy. I was younger too, and I had to go through my sisters, my brother, and then my parents to get any kind of FaceTime. Anyway,
the only one who was below you was the dog.
Yeah. Well, I had a younger brother to beat up on, but that's a whole different thing. But anyway,
thank God.
Yeah, right. But no, I'm so excited that you're bringing your one-man show to the Marietta Square, the Strand, and you show up May 29th. Is this your first time in Marietta, by the way?
I think it is, yeah.
Oh, wow. It's been a total pleasure getting to meet and talk with you. Sorry for the technical problems to start out with, but it was super fun to talk to you, and I hope to meet you when you're here in Marietta, Tom.
Yeah. Please say hello after the show. I got to ask you, what high school did you go to?
I went to Butler High School in Butler, New Jersey, Passaic County.
Butler. All right, I'm Rahway in Union.
Oh, really? Yeah. I don't know if we played you guys in football, or I don't think football, but we might have.
Yeah, you wouldn't have seen me at the games. I was in the theater.
Mr. Tom Dugan, actor and one-man play he wrote called Wiesenthal, coming to Marietta's Strand Theater Wednesday, May 29th through Sunday, June 2nd. Go and get your tickets. You can give them a call at 770-293-0080, or you can check out my show notes for a link to tickets. This is Bill Nowicki saying thanks for listening to Marietta Stories Podcast. Make sure and tell a couple folks about the show and tell them all the great things we have going in Marietta, Georgia. Thanks.